In order to master this difficult opening, it's not enough just to know a few variations. You have to put your heart and soul into it, to love it, and only in this way will you understand its mysteries. So said Lev Psakis, twice Soviet champion and great maestro of the opening. I think he was getting a bit carried away, but it is a really great opening, but rather difficult as well. But difficult not only for you, but your opponent too. If you know it and understand the opening well, you'll have a great advantage over your adversary. White plays the pawn to e4, and black plays e6, that denotes the French defence. White plays the pawn to d4, and black plays d5, establishing a strong point in the centre. First we'll be looking at e5, the advanced variation. Then I'll go on to look at a repertoire system against both knight c3 and knight d2, namely knight f6, and after e5 the unusual move knight e4, and after knight takes e4, d takes e4. In the second video in this series I'll be recommending separate systems against both 3 knight c3 and the Tarrasch 3 knight d2. Then in this first video I'll be looking at the exchange variation, e takes d5, e takes d5, and finally I finish up with the King's Indian attack, 2d3. So first of all, the advanced variation. White plays the pawn forward to e5. Now this pawn formation is really typical of the French, and I think it's very important to have a closer look at this before we start looking into detailed variations. Every opening has its advantages and disadvantages. What you have to do is appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of your position and play accordingly. You have to imagine you're a barrister arguing a case. You have to take a view and back it. When you play the French, your greatest strength is your pawn structure, this pawn chain f7, e6 and d5. It's very difficult for white to break that down, and it gives your position great inner strength. Now I think your greatest disadvantage when you play the French is your lack of mobility. Let's look at this pawn on e5 here. It's preventing the knight coming to its most usual square, f6, so immediately you're slightly cramped. What you can do to offset this problem with mobility and space is hit out at white's centre. Now you have two pawn breaks in this position. c5, trying to attack white's pawn chain, and if white captures, well, you've broken down the pawn chain already, and you can recapture with the bishop, and the bishop finds a very nice square. If we can just go back, the other pawn break that you have in this position is to play f6, and if white captures that pawn, well, you have a choice of how to recapture, but immediately you can see that the knight finds its way to a decent square. The other thing that black can do to relieve his lack of mobility in this position is to exchange off pieces. Now, you've probably heard a lot about the bad black